Howdy, folks. Today we're diving into the question, how can creative collaboration and community supercharge your photography growth in 2025? We're talking connections, partnerships, and how working with others can unlock your full creative potential right after this. Welcome to Camera Shake, where we bring you the insider scoop on all things photography and videography, giving you a unique opportunity to stay ahead of the curve. We've spent literally hundreds of hours interviewing some of the most renowned photographers of our time, giving you access to knowledge and expertise that's not available anywhere else. As always, I'm your host, Kirsten Nutz, and if you're like me and you enjoy free podcast and YouTube content, you can become a supporter of the show by buying us a coffee over on buymeacoffee.com/camerashake to help us create more exciting episodes for you. But of course, you're more than welcome to say no. No hard feelings. Just know that your support really does make a difference. Now, without further ado, let's give it up for today's special guest, photographer, educator, and collaboration champion, all the way from the Arizona desert. It's the one and only Mark Wallace. Mark, man, good to have you back on the show.
Hello. Thanks for having me back. This is going to be a blast. Yeah, I feel like I'm in full podcast mode. I got the big headphones on. I got the stuff. I wanted to go all in. I don't think I've ever done it like this before. This is pretty fun.
Oh, yeah. Now we're talking collaboration today, and and the positive impact that collaborating with others can have on your photography in 2025, or just actually just anytime really. It's one of these things. The interesting thing about this is we had a little conversation just before we went live, and you mentioned that collaboration is literally like the third pillar of your business. That's interesting. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so I created Snap Factory in 2003. That's the name of my studio and business. And it was built on a three-pillar ethos. And so the first is education. So educating photographers. I used to have a classroom space and I had classes that went for 11 years in that classroom. So every Tuesday, every Thursday night, um, every other Saturday, we had people in. So in education, the second is inspiration. So that's the second tier of that three-tiered system. And that was just doing things like we're doing now. Inspiring photographers to look at other photographers and artists and painters and musicians and creatives to be inspired to do things. And then the last was collaboration. And so the nice thing about having that classroom and that community in Phoenix. So for many, many years, we had about 25 people every 8 weeks that would roll through that. So over the years, it turned into thousands of people. We would encourage people to come. We had community events for people that had gone through some of the classes and the training. We'd bring in their friends, and we would do collaboration events. We'd do photo walks. We'd do gallery shows. We'd do open door photo shoots where you could just come and learn. And it was probably one of my most enjoyable phases of life. And then when I started traveling full time back in 2014, it didn't stop. So the classes and stuff I was doing in Phoenix I continued teaching on Adorama TV and my own YouTube channel and with Creative Live and through F-stoppers and, different places like that. But the cool thing was I could roll into a city and post on social media and say, hey, let's hang out. And we would get 20, 30 people would show up in places like Istanbul and Frankfurt and Berlin and London and Sao Paulo and like all over the place, pretty much on every continent, and just hang out with other photographers and learn and share and be inspired, get some education from each other, learn tips and tricks, mistakes that were made, or just, have friends that shared a coffee and a common goal of being creative. It's a fantastic thing. And we're still doing it now. We're doing it right now.
Exactly. This is the whole thing. Yeah, I mean, even a podcast format like this is really all about collaboration. Since I have guests on the show every week, and we're collaborating on making a thing. When did it first dawn on you that this was going to be such an important thing?
Well, my dad was a preacher, so I grew up in Southern Baptist church and in that whole community. And my mom was a teacher. She taught English. My dad was a teacher, and that's what preachers are. And so I sort of grew up in an educational space. I can remember early days. My dad, well, I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and I was watching him prepare some sermon, and he's like, "Yeah, you want to learn how to do this? Let me show you how to build an outline." And he showed me how to do an intro, the 3 points, the conclusion, how to outline a presentation and stuff. And so early days, I was learning how to be an educator. But part of that, growing up in that same type of community, is that you are in a community. So there are, I don't know if you're familiar with Southern Baptist life. Um, it's you're at church in these educational, there's biblical education, but you're in training union, you're in Wednesday night uh, studies, you're in Sunday morning. It's like classroom, 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 classroom. And it's all about people teaching people and sharing their experiences and that type of stuff. And so I think that sort of that's pretty much all I've known is that type of community. So I don't really ascribe to that faith anymore. So, but parts of that have stayed with me. My freshman year of college, I was at a university here in Phoenix, Arizona. My work study program was working for the dean of education. And so I was around people that were creating lesson plans and student teachers. And so I was around teachers. And then that inspired me to learn how to teach. And so part of teaching, to be a good teacher, one of my early educational teachers said, when I was teaching something, I don't know what it was, but they came and observed. I was teaching, and they said, "Mark, you have a huge problem. You're just talking too much." They said, "You should only be talking about 10 or 20% of the time. And the rest of the time, your students should be hands-on doing things. They should be trying the stuff. They should be failing. They should be trying to figure stuff out. So all of your teaching should be activity-based." And that's sort of how I learned to teach, was to say, okay, the way that we learn is by doing, and by doing with others in a room, in a community, so that we can sharpen each other's skills. We can learn different things. And that's just proven over and over and over again. And then in the early 90s, I created an organization with some friends called Student Life Camps and Conferences. And we had to write scripts for on stage plays and dramas and all kinds of stuff. We were performing all the time, all over the country. And I was sort of one of the people that was core to creating all of these programs. And I was watching, I forget what show it was, 2020, I think. Used to be one of my favorite shows. I don't think it's on the air anymore. But they were interviewing a guy named Doug Hall. And Doug Hall wrote this book called Jumpstart Your Brain. And it's a book that I think every creative should read. So Doug Hall, Jumpstart Your Brain. I don't know if it's still in print. I think it is. But it's this Doug Hall was a guy that created advertising campaigns for huge corporations. And so he was like a madman in, the 80s and 90s. So he's Don Draper of, of current day, I guess. And he was known for being able to create these really amazing ad campaigns. And people asked him how he did it. And he created this program where you could come and learn how to do it. And then he wrote this book. And the core of that methodology, if you want to be creative, is don't do it in a vacuum. Do it with others. And so this book teaches that concept of how to be creative in a group. And then the second half of the book are just exercise after exercise after exercise. So if you and I and 4 or 5 other photographers wanted to create a new YouTube channel, let's say, and we're like, okay, where do we start? We could go into that book and say, okay, here's the 5 exercises we're going to do. The first one is called Scatterbrain. And we're going to do this. We're all going to write on a piece of paper our initial idea. Then we pass it to the right. And then I'll take your thing, and you've written down make it about sunset photography. And I'll write, okay, if we're going to do sunset photography, then we need to make sure that we learn about dragging the shutter. We need to learn about how we can balance ambient light with the light from a flash. And then I'd pass it to the guy on the right. And then you would pass me the one that you've expanded on. And it's on, oh, we have to talk about post-production, and you put down Lightroom. And I'm like, oh, but yeah, we got to talk about Evoto, and I'll put that on there. And then I pass that. Then you start passing. So that's one exercise. And at the end of that, you would have 200 ideas from that exercise, which of those 200, 5 are going to be good. But you have a place to start. And then go to the next chapter in the book, and it's, okay, this is an exercise called whatever. And then in the group, you do that thing. And then you get another 200 ideas. And then it's an amazing book, because it's not just you should be collaborative. It's here's how you can be collaborative in a group. So I highly recommend it. And so when I used to do, when I was leading a team of writers and creatives, so I did that for about 13 years, the requirement, as soon as you were hired, you had to read the book. That was a requirement. And all of my employees that I have, it's a requirement that they have to read this book. A, to learn the philosophy of collaboration, but B, to understand these different exercises, so that when we go into our big conference room table with index cards, we're like, we're doing this. They know what that is that we're doing. So, yeah, that's a long answer to that question, but collaboration has been something that has been with me my entire life, and I truly believe in. And even now, even though I'm a solo contributor now, so I'm not working with a team like I used to, I have a group of people that I call pretty regularly. I mean, Ab Cisse, he's in New York. He worked for Mac Group. You've probably seen him on Adorama TV, and he's been on a bunch of PPA videos. And I think we probably talk almost every day. I'm like, what about this? And it could be about anything. We're bouncing ideas off of each other. I talk to, like, most of the people that you see me talk to online, you included. We text all the time. We're sending notes back and forth. We're talking to each other. We're complaining about stuff. We're asking questions. Like, just last week, I think we were talking about teleprompters and which ones work and how to control it. And that is something that happens with me, I think, every single day. Every single day.
I think the advantage there is that, you know, those sort of, because when you have a question, you ask somebody who you think has a valuable opinion of it. Um, these the answer then is already pre-tested. For the lack of a better word, you're
Sure.
not like stepping in the dark like you would with Google search, for example. Or um, the thing. What I often find is, like, when I'm searching for solutions, let's say on YouTube, for example, it's like, sometimes you can't see, what do they say? There's a German proverb. You can't see the forest for all the trees, or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
It's just it's it you end up getting, or I end up getting dragged you know, onto this never-ending path of exploring ideas. I find it much more useful to speak to somebody who, I know has experience with something, which gives me a pre-qualified, that's the word I was looking for, a pre-qualified response that is a lot more useful to me when it comes to
Sure.
solving a particular problem.
Well, and I think that the issue today is, um, so I'll take this. So we'll go this at a sort of a weird tangent. In a lot of the countries that I live in, they're developing nations, and if you want spaghetti sauce, you go to the store and there's a can of spaghetti sauce. That's all. That's the option. So that's what you're going to get. When I come back to the United States and I go to the grocery store and I'm like, I want a can of spaghetti sauce, it's an aisle of 50 brands, of different, like, fire roasted, normal stuff, garlic infused, organic, locally grown, whatever. Like, there's so many choices. I'm like, I don't know. And so, in one point, it's like, okay, spaghetti sauce, I got it. And in another situation, it's like, okay, I don't know, I'm having a meltdown. I think that happens to photographers and creatives all the time. Whereas we used to have a few tools to accomplish a goal. Now there are hundreds, hundreds. And the thing is, what's the right spaghetti sauce? What's the right post-production tool? What's the one that's going to get me to the level I want to be at? And the answer is almost all of them are going to work just fine. And a lot of people, especially on YouTube, were just like, tell me specifically what camera, what lens, what light modifier, like tell me specifically what I need. And I almost never tell them because it doesn't matter. You could have an Elinchrom 8-foot parabolic silver umbrella, or a Profoto, or a Neewer, or, in the photo, you're probably not going to be able to tell the difference. There are big differences between a Profoto setup and a Flashpoint setup, but you're not going to see those differences necessarily in the final product. It's in how much time it takes to set up. It's in the ability to control light. It's in there's a bunch of nuances to that. So my advice for people that are just like, what should I do? Just grab a can of spaghetti sauce and use it and see if you like it. Use whatever it works for you. Don't worry too much about it.
That's it. I mean, as I say, many ways, many roads lead to Rome. There's many ways of accomplishing the same thing. I mean, Photoshop in itself is actually just a really good example because there's like a million ways you could do the same thing. It just depends on what I mean, in inverted commas, whatever the best way of doing something really very much depends on the context that you're doing it in. And so,
Sure.
and the same thing is true for lighting. I get this question about light modifiers, especially for portrait work, for example. And my answer is always like, well, it just really depends on what the context is. Like, are you traveling with it? Because, when I'm traveling,
Sure.
I make different decisions from when I'm setting something up in my studio here. It's it, whatever. There's so many different situations where
Right.
one method might be advantageous over another method. It doesn't mean that there's only one way of doing it. It just means that, as you mentioned, sometimes, you know, one thing needs less setup time, you know?
Right. I'll ask people uh, when they're saying, which modifier should I buy? Which brand, which type? What they're like, just tell me. And I will try to turn that around and ask them, can you tell me how to cook an egg? How do you cook an egg? Just like the most simple thing. And they're like, "What do you want it fried or over easy? Do you want it boiled? Do you want it hard boiled? Do you want it?" Like, there's a million ways to boil an egg, and all of them, depends on what you like. Think about photography and creativity and art this in a similar way. There's not like the way that you cook an egg is the right way. It's the way that you like your eggs to be cooked. What's the right light modifier? Do you like soft light? You're shooting black and whites? Are you like, again, traveling? Do you have a budget? I don't know. Pick a spaghetti sauce. Try it out. Just buy something and start using it and see how it goes for you. Because the one of the best ways to find out what you need is to use something that doesn't work for you. And so early days, that was always my strategy is I would just buy the thing that I thought was right without giving it too much thought. And then after I used it for a while, then I would start to see like, oh gosh, this light, this light modifier, I can't control the spill, and it's going everywhere. And so what I need to do is I need to get a softbox with a grid, and then I'd buy that. I'm like, oh man, this is much better, but this grid is so difficult to put on and off, and it's not really flat. And so the control isn't is exactly where I want it to be, and the speed ring takes forever to set up. And so now I'm gonna get the next level. And so incrementally I would get things. And then in the end, somebody would take my studio lighting class and they'd be like, why in the hell would you, can I cuss on this? I hope so. Why, why in the heck, why would you, why would you buy this very expensive Profoto softbox with this grid and a speed ring that's made from Chimera? The speed ring itself is $300. Why the heck would you do that? Like, well, I'm shooting high-end clients, fashion work, product photography. I need consistent color temperatures that don't deviate. I have to control the light, and I need to be able to set up really, really quickly. And so this allows me to do that. When I started, I was using an umbrella. I didn't need any of that stuff. And so it wasn't like I just went from a $35 umbrella to a $1,000 softbox. It took a few years to sort of grow to that place.
Hey, let me just jump in real quick to tell you about the amazing sponsor of this episode, Platypod. Platypod offers innovative camera support systems designed to unleash your creativity. With their stable, versatile, and portable solutions, you can capture stunning shots like never before. And I'm not just saying that. As the host of the Camera Shake podcast, I can personally vouch for Platypod's incredible products. They've become an integral part of the show. In fact, I'm surrounded by various Platypod products holding up lights, cameras, microphones, and so on. It's really helped to transform the way I make the show and the way I shoot at home, in the studio, and on location. But don't just take my word for it. Explore Platypod's website at www.platypod.com to discover their range of products, including the Platypod Extreme, Platypod tripod heads, and the brand new handle, of course. Make sure to follow Platypod on Instagram and Facebook at Platypod Tripods for exclusive updates, tips, and giveaways. By choosing Platypod, you're not only investing in your photography, but you're also supporting the Camera Shake Photography Podcast. Thanks again to Platypod, our amazing sponsor. Platypod, where innovation never sleeps. I've had exactly the same experience. And, to a large extent, I'm still shooting the same softboxes that I've owned for several decades, because
Sure.
there's a number of different reasons for that. It's interesting because I recently changed to a different brand of softbox, and I can really very clearly see the difference especially in color. You know, However, I'm so used to my old tatty octoboxes that I just know how to deal with them. I know it just
Sure.
it just fits into my I don't know, into my workflow, and I still love using them. And it's actually when I'm using the sort of sophisticated, more modern kit that I'm starting to freak out a little bit because it just doesn't do what I'm used to. Do you know what I mean? So sometimes
Right.
it's a matter of I have like what is it, like a 7-inch reflector that I've literally this thing is battered to heck. It's dented, um it looks terrible. I still love using it because it does exactly what I need it to do, and
Sure.
I've been using it for, I don't know, 20 years, and it still does a
Well,
great job.
speaking of collaboration, one of the best things about collaborating and being a part of a photo community, being a part of a photo club, going on photo walks, that kind of stuff, is that you get the benefit of other people's experience.
Yes.
So one of the things I love going to New York and hanging out with Ab Cisse in his studio, because not only is he a fantastic photographer with 30 plus years of experience, he also works for the Mac Group. And so he has access to toys that sometimes aren't even on the market yet. And so I get to walk around and be like, oh, I wouldn't have never thought of doing that thing. Or what is this thing? Or, how would you do this? Or people just doing things that you never thought of. Like, oh, I would never thought of that. Just observing people. And then you take those and now they're part of your toolbox. And when you're shooting, somebody else sees you do that. And they're like, oh, I wouldn't have thought of that. Um, Being an assistant. So like the first, many years of being a photographer, I tried to be an assistant as much as possible, because it's one of the best ways to learn your craft. And not just for one person, but for many, many different artists. Because some people will be like, you've got to use, like I assisted a guy, Kareem Samsi Basha. He was in Birmingham when I was back in college. He shot for Life magazine when that was a thing, National Geographic, Sports Illustrated. And then he also had like family portraits, and he shot for pretty much anybody he would shoot. But he had a 300 millimeter, massive 300 millimeter Canon lens that he had like a suitcase for. Um, and I think it was a 300 prime, but it was this massive, massive lens. And that's the only lens he would shoot portraits with because he wanted the compression, the shallow depth of field, and everything. And so early days, I'm like, oh, I have to get one of these lenses. Or, you know, at that time, $8,000 or something for one of those. It was so expensive. And then, I was shooting with somebody else and they were using like a 50 plastic Fantastic. And, that lens is what, $150. And they were getting spectacular stuff. And I'm like, oh. okay, I don't need to spend $8,000 on this lens to get the look I want. I can get something similar with a $150 lens. It's you don't have to do the exact thing that your mentor is doing. That's a good lesson. Another great thing about collaboration, I'll give you a couple examples. Um, Sometimes when you're collaborating, the person that you're collaborating with will smack you around and set you straight. I guess that's the best way to put it. And sometimes you need that. And one of the uh, people that I've worked with in the past that is just really good at doing that is Gavin Hoey. And we were doing these Taskmaster. I don't know. You probably know Taskmaster. US people, if you don't know what Taskmaster is, go to YouTube, start watching it. There's 20 seasons now. It is one of the best shows on the planet. But when I was in London, my motorcycle was stolen, and I ended up living at Gavin's house for about a month, I think. I lived in his spare bedroom. And so we would watch this show, Taskmaster, and it was where people have these ridiculous tasks that they have to accomplish. And we're like, let's do this on Adorama TV, but for photography. Let's have Sam, so Gavin's wife, let's have Sam create these photo tasks. We won't know what they are, and then we'll just have to do them. So we did a bunch of these. Only a few of them aired because A, they weren't entertaining, and B, a lot of them they just weren't ready for prime time. But a couple of them, one of them was we had to go to a dollar store. I forgot what you guys call it in England.
I think it's pound stretcher or something.
Yeah. So you go to you get 1 pound, $1. You have to buy stuff. And so we had $3 or 3 pounds. And we had to buy 3 different props. And then we had to go in the studio and we had to use those props in the studio to create a portrait. And um, I was shooting one, I think it was with this light bulb, and it just was going nowhere. It was just like, this is stupid. This is dumb. And when you're shooting a YouTube video, if it's not working, you just scrap it and you shoot something else. And I'm like, nah, okay, let's be done with it. And Gavin was like, no, you have to finish. You don't get an out. We're not just going to scrap this episode. You have to finish this task. And I'm like, do I? I mean, we could just not do it. He's like, no, you're doing it. Like, work harder. He was just basically like, you're giving up too soon on this task. Get it done. I mean, he's Gavin, so he would never say it the way I just said it. He's very encouraging and nice. And so I'm like, okay. I just did not want to do it. And in the end, I created a portrait. I'll send it to you. It's this girl like, aha, I got this idea. And I figured out a way to make it work. And I would have never done that if he hadn't said, just, work harder. And, he gave me some ideas and stuff. That's the kind of thing that you need sometimes when you're just like, oh, okay, I'm done with this. I'm just like, I'm done. You need somebody to be like, come on, you're not done. Get some coffee, run around the building, do whatever you need to do. Don't stop. Keep going. And sometimes you'll be the person giving that feedback to somebody because you might see like, okay, I can see that Kirsten is on the edge of something that's going to be great. I don't know what it is because I'm not you, but I know you can get there, but you're giving up. I need to make sure you don't give up on this thing. You just need a little push because your energy is low or you're just discouraged or whatever it is. And that is a fantastic thing that happens when you work in a team. A lot of times when you're just solo and nobody's going to see me give up, you just give up. But when you're working in a team and you're like, well, everybody's going to see me give up, I can't give up. It's like jogging alone is totally different than jogging in a group.
Yeah.
It's
There's sort of
it's
there's a degree of accountability to it as well,
yeah,
which I think people often understand when when you think of I don't know, jogging is a good example, or going to the gym, for example. If you have a gym buddy, it's much harder to say I'm not going because you feel like you have to be accountable because you've made an arrangement with somebody else, as opposed to, because if you're just like, if you're lounging around, you're like, oh, I should really be going to the gym today, but I'm just really not feeling it. It's much easier to just go, nah, just doing it tomorrow. You know, when Nick and I first started the podcast during the pandemic, at the very beginning, we um we set ourselves photo challenges and the occasional video challenge as well. And really, what that was is, we thought it would make fun content, but there was also a different side to it. One, it was challenging because we would come up with something, some topic, um, and because then we would say like, okay, well, next week that's what the show is going to be about, right? So it would give us a deadline and accountability because we would have to have this thing done. And it became particularly fun when we involved, guests in it as well. I remember we did a selfie challenge with Ivan Weiss. And for those of you who don't know who Ivan is, go check out those episodes. They're incredible. Ivan is one of the leading portrait and headshot photographers over here in London. His work is absolutely stellar, incredible artistry. And immediately when you've got him in a competition between Nick, myself, and him to create
Shit, like,
a selfie portrait, you go, "Ooh, I better raise my game here because, I don't wanna look like an idiot." And it's really that push that really pushes you on to maybe try something that is outside of your comfort zone. And the thing was, at the time, I have to say, I'm technically speaking a portrait photographer, so I loved this challenge. Obviously, it was, I'd say, relatively easy for Ivan, but, at the time, Nick hadn't really done a lot of portrait work, and so it was a real challenge for him, I think. And his result was outstanding. He really did an amazing job, in with his self portrait, and it was really, it was one of these things where it was a really good example for how just putting yourself into that position, creating that sense of accountability, and sort of putting a deadline to it.
sure,
It really
sure.
pushed. We all had to push our game in that.
Yeah. One of the things I have learned, so I teach a class on creativity, and there's an exercise that I do, um, and it's, when I have a group of 12 or 20 people, something like that. What I'll do is I have these cards, and let's say I have 20 people. On 10 cards, it will say, "Take the most spectacular picture." That's all it says. And on the other 10 cards, it says, "Take a photo that you're proud of that includes high contrast image. Make sure that you use side light. Try to," and it'd be very specific, whatever. And then I'll hand these cards out. And I'm like, okay, everybody has a secret task. Nobody say what their task is. We're going to give you 10 minutes, go into the studio. And then at the end of the 10 minutes, we're going to come back to the classroom. And so we do that. We come back and I'm like, okay, raise your hand if you know that you killed this. You know you've smashed it and you've accomplished the goal. And about 10 people will be like, yeah, got it. And I'm like, okay, what does your task say? And it's all the people that have the specific task. Create this kind of portrait doing this and this and this with constraints. And the people that are like, I failed miserably, it's the people that had total freedom. But the only direction is create something spectacular. And creativity works that way. If you have a task that you're doing by yourself or in a group, and you're having difficulty figuring out how to accomplish that, give yourself some constraints and you'll be more creative, which seems counterintuitive. It seems like if you have no rules, you can do anything you want, you're going to just create amazing things. That's not the case. It's almost always true that if you have constraints, you have to use these colors and this format and do it in this amount of time on this budget. That's when it basically eliminates a lot of the spaghetti sauces. And so you can focus on fewer things and be more creative in that process. I'll tell you another example of Gavin giving me some help and why collaboration is so good. It was at the same time I was at his house, in his guest house. And at that time, I think I had to do a video every single week for Adorama TV. And sometimes you're like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And like, I think we'd done what we could do in Gavin's tiny studio. And about 2 weeks before, I was in Paris and I had shot a video about working in tiny spaces. And the video was okay, but the portraits that I created just like these aren't these I can't show these on Adorama TV because the model had some complexion issues and it just wasn't at the standard of what I wanted to use. And Gavin's like, show me these, show them to me. So I showed them to him and he goes, "Oh, have you ever heard of the Nick collection?" I'm like, "No, I don't know what that is." And so he showed me the DxO Nick collection. At that time, it was Google's Nick collection. He's like, "Oh, you could do this. You could add these effects and frames and, do this stuff." And so he's like, "Throw me one of those images." And I threw it in. He's like, "Yeah." And we did some stuff in analog effects and it looked really cool. Like, that is so cool. And so the video became a 2-part video. And it was, here's how you shoot in tiny spaces. And now here's how I edited these in the Nick collection to create these effects. And that's when I fell in love with the Nick collection, and I have used it. That was 2017, I think. So yeah, I've used it for almost a decade now, based
Yeah.
on that one interaction of, I don't know what to do with these images. Yeah, try this.
I use it all the time. Color effects and silver. What's it called? Silver effects or whatever it's called.
Still effects, yeah.
Yeah, it's those are my favorites. The black and white conversions are stunning.
Yeah, Martin, oh, what's Martin's last name? He's a London photographer. He does, fashion. He does hair, like lots of hair, like hairdressers and stuff. They do these amazing things, and he shoots that. He was doing some amazing black and white, photography, and I'm like, "Martin, how are you getting this look?" He's like, "Oh, I'm using silver effects," which was funny because at that time I knew about the Nick collection. Um, I think it might have been like the same month that I learned about analog effects from Gavin, because I was in London and he's in London. He's like, "Oh, I use silver effects." And so maybe that was also just one more, reinforcing you should use the Nick collection. I'm like, "Oh, okay." It's like the film grain and the silver effects that you get. It looks like a silver gel print on your screen. Like, how are you doing this? It's amazing.
Yeah, silver effects is fantastic. And I may be giving away my secret to my black and whites here, but it's yeah, it's all silver
Oh,
effects.
it's well, and I did an in-depth class for f-stoppers on the entire DxO software family. Um, and so I used Nick collection for years and years and years. And DxO and f-stoppers said, "Hey, can you do everything?" And I had never used Photolab ever. So I'm like, I don't know anything about Photolab. I don't know anything about, all the other, um, you know, uh, pieces of software in the family. And so they're like, "Well, can you learn it?" I'm like, "Sure." And I spent, I think, 7 months, like, going through every single nook and cranny, every slider, every dial, and learning that software so I could teach it. And it's a phenomenal suite of applications. And the nice thing, if you're watching and you're like, "What post-production software should I use?" It's a great option because it's not a subscription. Like, you buy it, you own it. You don't have to renew a license every year. Um, for me, it's not the tool that I would use because the library management and the culling and the data, that I use to look up, I have to be able to go in. I just did a video for PPA about travel photography, and I had to go in and find images that I had shot 15, 20 years ago and be able to bring those out and then export them for a 4K video, which I was able to do in my Lightroom libraries. I can go in and see all that stuff and pull it out. I couldn't do that in Photolab. There's no way. Um, and then I discovered Evoto about a year ago, and that's radically changed my photo editing. Evoto is, if you're not using Evoto and you're a portrait photographer, you should be using it. It it's an application that does things that you are already doing, but it does it for you in literally half a second. So a lot of the stuff that I used to do with frequency separation or skin retouching or blemish removal, line removal, stray hair removal, cleaning up backgrounds, removing dust spots, fixing seamless white, footprints on the white paper, uh, cropping intelligently, being able to fix teeth, being able to whiten, like just red eye reduction, that kind of stuff that you've already been doing it in Lightroom and Photoshop and Capture One and all that stuff. But it was just sort of this manual task, Wacom tablet and fix, fix, fix. Um, Now I just go, oh, click. It's one click, boom. My photo is 99% finished.
You know,
It's
the thing
amazing.
I love about that, I mean, the Evoto is phenomenal. Another good option would be Aperty, by Scala. Very similar thing. Which again, similar sort of thing. But here's the thing. I mean, I do think that learning how to manually edit using things like frequency separation, things like that, dodging and burning, the classic staples of retouching essentially, is super important. I'll tell you why. Because when you use, for instance, I use things like Apathy, for example, all the time in my workflow. And of course, yes, it makes perfect sense. It speeds up my workflow dramatically. It essentially means just it's time is money. It means I can get job done quicker, and so on and so forth. But knowing how to do things manually gives you an eye for detail. And it
Right.
basically means that you can look at the result, in a much more discerning manner and go like, okay, because none of these software packages are infallible. There are occasions where you just go, okay, there's a thing here. I didn't deal. I have to go in and
Sure.
fix this and that, and or I might have to. Skin is a really good example.
Sure.
When is skin smoothing too much and when is it not enough? There's a fine line, between really overcooking it, especially in the
It's
beginning.
funny. It is a fine line, except for when you cross it. It's usually like, I think I just crossed it. And then you look at it a week later and like, whoa, I went
Yeah.
way.
That's it,
like,
yes.
because you're doing it incrementally. You're like, this looks pretty good. And then you come back a week later, like, what was I thinking? Oh my. Or you post it on Instagram. You're like, whoa,
Yeah.
man,
And that
delete.
is
Let's redo that.
that is why I never deliver images straight after I finish the edit. I never do
Oh,
that. I
me either.
always
Never,
wait
never.
at least 24 hours, 48 hours. Usually what happens is I finish an edit on a Friday and then I won't send it until the Monday because it gives me at least a weekend to sort of recalibrate my brain. And often, to be honest, often when I look back at the images, a couple of days later, I go, nah,
Yeah.
I
Well,
think,
I have the 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 issue, I think, for me, um, is that especially when you're shooting portraits, if you're shooting portraits of a model or a person and you really are having a good time and you're enjoying the shoot, the images, you're going to perceive them to be better than they actually are. Or controversially, or conversely, not controversially, um, if you're having a struggle with a person and you're like, this person is a jerk and I am not having fun with this, it's some real estate person that just doesn't want to be here and I got to get this headshot and you're going to look at that and be like, this photo isn't so good. So what I try to do for my portrait work, especially if I'm just like in love with the model and they're just fantastic and everything's good and the music is awesome and we're listening to Dua Lipa and he's like, click, 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 this is great. You know, I will wait 1 to 2 weeks before I even look at the images because it gives me, some separation between the emotional reaction and the legitimate reaction. And I find it interesting, talking about Lightroom, is I will sometimes go back and look at images that I shot. There was a session that I shot, and it was probably 15 years ago, something like that. And I was working, so I'm working with an artist in Madrid. She does fine art nude paintings. And so I used to shoot all these fine art nude images. And so she's painting the images that I shot years ago. And she asked me, she's like, hey, can you go through and just check to see if you have stuff that I haven't seen yet? So I found this session that I did, and we were looking at it together. And she's like, these are amazing. Like, why haven't you showed me these? I'm like, man, I don't know, because they are pretty darn good. And then I remembered, I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I couldn't stand this model." like, she was horrible, and she said all these horrible things about some friends of mine, and, like, she became sort of the outcast of this city where I was working in, and nobody liked her, and, like, ah. And so even though I'd paid, I had a model release, I owned the images, everything was all legal. I had just filed them away on a hard drive and never looked at them again. And then 15 years later, like, these are really good, and I never published them because I didn't like the person I was photographing. Um, yeah, there's always an emotional reaction in art between what you're doing and the final outcome.
Yeah.
Usually to a negative side. How many singers do you know? How many artists have you seen that are just getting started? And you're like, they don't realize how bad they are. They just don't realize how bad they are because they're in love with the sound of their voice or they're in love with whatever. And they don't have somebody that's saying, you need to work on this. You need a coach. You need some criticism, some constructive criticism so that you can see things that you don't see. What's the guy's
Yeah.
name? A-Team. He sings the A-Team. He's the British, he's done
Oh,
Wembley. Um, you know,
ginger, red hair. What's his name?
yes,
I know exactly who you mean. Oh my god, my brain's just gone
this
to mush.
guy,
Ed Sheeran.
Ed Sheeran.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's it.
thank you. Ed Sheeran. I saw him on some podcast somewhere, and somebody was saying, you're such a good singer. And he's like, it wasn't always that way. And there's a clip of him when he was like 17, I think, singing something, and it is horrible. It is atrociously bad. And he he played that to say, I thought I was pretty good. And I saw this and I'm like, man, I got to get better. And he's like, I had to work really, really hard to learn how to sing because I didn't know how to sing. And, that's something that a lot of creatives don't understand is that, there are people that have just raw talent that wake up and they know how to sing or paint or take a photograph or whatever. The vast majority of people, you've got to learn about light and color and shadow and form and shape and, composition and creative moment or decisive moments and the history. And like, there's a lot of work that you have to do um, like what you were saying about learning how to retouch manually so that what's up to snuff and what isn't. Because when you're starting out, you don't know.
Because you don't know what you
Um,
don't know in the beginning. That's
you
the
don't know what you don't know. And it's like being a little kid, you know, ketchup and French fries is the epic, that's the peak of culinary delight. And,
and still
you
is.
don't,
And
yeah,
still is.
it's like so delicious. But as you grow older, you start to learn different nuances in food and drink and, but if you try to give escargot to a small child, they're, I don't want to eat that. But somebody that's got some experience and they've like tried some things, they're able to separate, okay, this is a snail that I'm eating and it's delicious. You have to sort of grow into that unless you grew up with it. But, that's just the same with art and collaboration and being a part of a community. You get people with different perspectives that can be like, Kirsten, I know you think this is good. However, have you thought about perhaps X, Y, and Z? And then you try it, like, oh, that's pretty good. You learn to grow.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely it's one of the major factors, I think. One is, of course, people don't realize. I bring this back to an interview that I saw a long time ago with Peter McKinnon, and I remember the interview saying something like, "What did it feel like being such an overnight success?" And he goes, "Well, what people don't realize is that I've been doing this for 7 years before anybody even bothered to
Sure.
watch one of my videos." And this is the thing, of course, often things appear to be an overnight success or, um, or like a viral success or whatever, when really the people behind the scenes have been working at this for years and years and years and years in order to get them, to where they are. And it's one of those things where it just takes years of experience and practice and hard work to get to a standard where all of a sudden people are paying attention. The same thing's true for lots
Sure.
of things. This podcast being one, not that anybody pays attention to this, but you know, it's it really, I think it took about, I would say, it took about 100 episodes roughly until anybody actually really paid
Sure.
attention. Where all of a sudden it was like, huh, 100 episodes.
Hmm.
That's actually a lot of, that's actually a lot of episodes. You know,
Right.
after whenever, I don't remember Nick and I at the time, whenever we spoke to anybody, we'd like, hey, we've made 20 episodes of this podcast. People went, oh, yeah, it's nice. Yeah, yeah, cute.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
So,
You got to do stuff. When I was riding my motorcycle around the world, um, I thought, oh, I'm going to get a bunch of sponsors because I'm riding my motorcycle literally around the world solo. Who does that? Turns out thousands of people do that. And so I remember I rode from Canada all the way through the United States, Central America, sailed, to South America, rode all the way down to Buenos Aires, hopped over to South Africa, rode all the way up through Africa, made it to London, flew from Africa to London with my bike, rode into Germany, and I had a meeting with the marketing team at BMW Motorcycles, BMW Motorrad. And they were all excited, they're like, oh, yeah, we've been watching. You've done 3 continents. That's pretty exciting. And I'm like, yeah, and you need to sponsor me. Right. So I sat down with them and they're like, oh, yeah. First of all, you need to finish riding around the world. Like, at least do that. That's the entry point for us to even consider. I'm like, are you serious? They're like, yeah, like everybody's doing this. Like, you're not so special. They said it in a nice way, but
yeah.
they're like, you think you're the only person on the earth that's ridden a motorcycle around the world? They're like, not even close. Um, like the starting point is you got to have like 60 countries under your belt before we'll even consider. And then you got to be something special. Like, how are you any different than the other 500 people that have done the exact same thing? Like, do you have an on-screen persona that's different? Are you doing this for some reason? Like, what makes you different? And, it's like, well, I'm a white guy who's, like, basically, they're like, "You got nothing special. You gotta be Kinga, or you gotta be, Itchy Boots. You gotta be somebody that has some story to tell that's unique." Like, okay, fair enough. The same is true of photography. The same is true of art. Like, what are you doing that sets you apart from everybody else?
That's true, and, you just reminded me of, The Long Way Home or The Long Way
Yeah, yeah.
Round. Yeah,
Long
so
way
this
around, long way up, long way down, long way
exactly.
yeah.
So there's a new season out, The Long Way Home,
Yep,
I don't know if you've seen it. It's Ewan McGregor and Charlie Borman, riding through Scandinavia and stuff, which is super interesting because I love Scandinavia,
sure.
and so they've I managed to get through a few places that I've also been to, and it's just a fun thing to watch. But the thing there is, of course, the X factor there is it's Ewan McGregor. It's Obi-Wan Kenobi riding a motorcycle. You know,
Well, the thing is, Charlie Borman has done tons. He's got a series out right now on YouTube, where he's riding with BMW. Nobody's watching it. He did By Any Means, which he traveled around the world by any means, plane, tuk-tuk car, whatever. Nobody watched it. He's done like Charlie Borman has done tons of stuff. He's a much, much more traveled and storied uh, adventurer than Ewan McGregor. But when Charlie Borman does stuff, it's people that know motorcycles that watch his stuff. When Ewan shows up, Mr. Star Wars, boom, Apple
I
TV,
would,
fun stuff.
yes, of course.
Um, and the thing that sort of I watched the original Long Way Round when it was
Mhm.
him and Russ Malkin, and that I don't know if you've seen Long Way Round, but
I did watch it
that's
originally. Yeah.
that to me is the pure Long Way Round Charlie Ewan adventure. The other ones are a lot different, and from my perspective, and I know we're getting off into adventure travel, not photography, but I'll just tell you a gripe. So I have done almost every mile that they have done, but I've done it by myself with no crew, no safety net, no nothing. And when I was doing Africa, I I um I found out what a lot of their routes were, where they stayed. I found GPS coordinates, and there's this network of adventure travelers that share information. And so I found out like where did they go because I wanted to go down the same roads. And what I found out was in I don't know about the other adventures, but in Africa, a lot of the places, how do I say this in a nice way? Some of the things they did for the camera, and they didn't really do them. And it was like, okay, like I stayed at this place on Lake Malawi where it was like this crazy difficult ride down into this place, and they stayed there. It's on the show on Long Way Down, and when I was staying there, I was talking to the guy that owned the place. He's like, "Yeah, they didn't even ride their motorcycles down. They couldn't do it. So we had to have locals ride the bikes down so that we could film the stuff here and then get them back out." And I heard stuff like that, you know, not a lot. I mean, they legitimately have ridden their motorcycles through crazy stuff for sure. I don't want to take anything away from that. But it's hard for me to watch. Like on Long Way Up. So they did Patagonia and they did Chile and all that stuff up on electric bikes.
Electric Harleys, actually. That was interesting.
Yeah, electric Harleys. And so I have done that exact route on my motorcycle, and I made a video. It's Mark Wallace Patagonia. You can watch it. And I'm watching it. I'm like, this is cool because this is my backyard. I know this place very, very well. I know all these places and cities, and I've got friends in all these cities. And there was an episode where they couldn't charge the bikes because they didn't have a charging place. And in rolls like an 18-wheeler with a giant generator on the back, diesel powered. And it turns out that that truck followed them for the whole route. I'm like, so did they do it? I mean,
Yeah.
if basically you have an entire crew of 30 people following you as you go, and if there's any difficulty at all, you're okay. Did you do the adventure or did you make a show? And they made a show.
Yeah, so this is an interesting thing, and of course, the general public, I think, generally forget the fact that a lot of the time these are TV shows,
Yeah,
and
it's a
if
TV show.
and if it fails halfway through, then you don't have a show. Yet you've just spent probably millions of dollars on a budget,
Sure.
in order, so it somehow has to succeed. And I tell you, this is one of the reasons why one of many reasons why I decided to leave the music industry originally. Because many years ago, I used to run a music school. Um, and this was like, I started in the very early 2000s. And this was like at the height of reality TV shows like X Factor, for example. And there was a whole barrage of reality TV shows like that, Superstars, and the X Factor was
Sure.
probably the biggest one. Um, and and there were super popular, mega popular shows on TV at the time. And and so I got a little bit of an insight into how these shows work because some of our students over the years took part in the audition process of X Factor in particular. And what I realized at the time, or I learned very quickly, was how abysmal these shows actually were, especially X
Just for
Factor.
the people. Well, now there's
Because
documentaries telling people how horrible those shows were.
yeah, but the thing was like, it was because I remember you watch a show like that, and you kind of it's an audition process and different audition stages of auditions. And you go like, how do these people think they can sing, for example? If they have like they're completely tone deaf, not a single note is in tune, everything's out of time, you know, and you go, how do they think that they can sing? I mean, it's unbelievable. I can't understand how they can stand there and deliver this and actually think that they have even the remotest chance of getting anywhere on this talent show in inverted commas, right? Until I learned that by the time you watch this on television in what appears to be stage one of the audition stages, this is already stage five or whatever, because on
Right.
all the previous non-televised stages, they've been told how great they are. And so they rock up on the first audition on TV
Jeez.
full of confidence and in the completely, in the crazy belief that they're like super talented and have a chance. Only then to be murderously and and
Right.
brutally being put down and being made fun of in front of TV, in front of TV cameras. And you sit there as an audience, and you listen to what, I don't know, the likes of Simon Cowell or whoever the judges of the day were, how they verbally put them down, this is medieval torture, that we're
It's
watching on
bad.
TV, and honestly, and that's the TV format. That is why
Sure.
it's so successful, because you wanna hear what, ghastly thing the judges say to some people who are completely deluded, apparently. But what you don't realize is that at least on 3, 4, 5 occasions previously, they've been told how great they are. And it's just like,
Sure.
it to me just seems such a, callous way of you know, uh, making people believe something, just in order to get that TV fix and get the ratings. It was just
Well, that's
it's
what
horrendous.
that's why those shows exist, is for people to watch them.
Absolutely.
Um, Top Gear, which it was not a thing in the United States. I was shocked when I learned of Top Gear to realize it's the most popular television show in the world. Like, what? We don't even know about this show. Like, what? Yeah, we didn't know about it until it became the Grand Tour on Amazon in the
Oh,
United
right.
States.
Right.
Yeah, and so, like, we didn't know who these guys were. But after watching the Grand Tour on Amazon, like, this show is amazing. And so I went back and I was watching Top Gear, the old stuff. And um, so people criticized Clarkson and the team, because they are like, these shows are highly produced and they're scripted and they're fake and blah, blah, blah. And so they said, okay, we're going to make one where there's no script, there's no pre-production, there's nothing. We're just going to go and shoot it the way you think we should shoot it. And so they made an episode. I don't remember. I don't think it's on YouTube. It's on Amazon or something. But there is one Top Gear where they're like, we didn't script anything, and it's horrible. Like, you watch this episode, and at the end, it's the three guys, and are like, you see why we do that? You're like, if we don't script it, if we don't do some pre-production, if we don't, it is not entertaining. It's just watching three dudes make some mistakes, and it is not good television. Um, and like, they're right. Top Gear is Top Gear because of that team that produces it. And the other crazy thing is, like, in the last, um, it's not the last Top Gear, but it's the last Grand Tour, I think, the Amazon version, where they pan back the very, very last one, and they're like, here's the three dudes. And then they show the crew that makes this show. It's like 40 people that are there constantly. So you're thinking it's like three guys in cars doing these crazy things, and there's some GoPros in the cars. No, that's not the case at all. There are segment producers, there are safety guys, there are riggers, there are, stunt doubles. They're like just this massive team of people that make this show that we can watch to believe three guys are having these ridiculous adventures. Um, that's collaboration for you right there.
Oh,
That's
absolutely.
that's the way that, most of the stuff that we consume, we see the tip of the iceberg. Like any late night show, you're looking at, Jimmy Kimmel or Seth Meyers, whoever, the person sitting at the desk doing the interview, they're good at reading a teleprompter or cards, and they've done some work. But there's a room of writers, there's segment producers, there is a whole legal team there. Those, just look at the credits for one of those shows. It's not one dude making up, all these funny stuff. It's this huge team of people creating, and one guy gets the credit for all of the work that everybody else does. And, over and over and over again, if you look at the most successful creatives, they're part of a team. People are part of the team. Um, even if you look at, like, um, oh, what's his name? Choppy ear off guy. Only could see yellow. Van Gogh. If it wasn't for his brother,
I thought you meant Trump there
he
for a minute. I
no,
thought you were gonna go
no,
to orange.
no, 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 no. Um, if it wasn't for his brother, we would never have any of his works. His brother supported him and basically gave us all of Van Gogh's works were, you know, his brother and the people surrounding him, he had severe mental health issues, but he was able to create because of the community that he was in. You look at what happened with Picasso, and again, he's working on inspiration. He said, "What great artists, good artists borrow, great artists steal." Is that what he said? Something like that. And you look at what happened with the Impressionists and what happened in the Paris Exposition around, what was that, 1905 or 10, whatever it was, when the Eiffel Tower was built. You look at what those guys were doing. They weren't even allowed to show their works in the galleries. They had to create their own stuff because everybody thought it was, rubbish and vulgar and no good. And now Musée d'Orsay is filled with their work. You look at all the writers like Fitzgerald and the guys that were living in the left bank and all of this stuff that was happening, Hemingway and all that stuff. Um, those guys hung out constantly. They drank together, they talked together, they read each other's works, they criticized each other. They weren't creating in a vacuum, they were creating in a community. And if you look at most great movements of art, even Ansel Adams, F-64 group, he was a part of that. And then you had like Man Ray, who was in a totally different group. He's the Surrealists and the Salvador Dali and all those guys, and they were at odds. And you look at people that are creating now. People aren't creating in a vacuum. People that are successful, they're working in teams. They're working in communities. Even individual contributors. So, like Adorama TV, when I was doing that, we had myself, we had Ab, we had Daniel Norton and Seth and Gavin and Vanessa and, Tamara Lackey and a bunch of people. We talk to each other all the time, and we still do. A lot of us are still talking to each other. And one of the frustrations was, if I was trying to create something, I'd be like, okay, I got to do some research to figure out like how to present this in a good way. Like, dang it, Gavin's already done this video. Like, so-and-so's already done this video. It's already been done. And even Vanessa Joy and I, we had no communication. We weren't talking to each other. And I published a video on how to fake golden hour. And the exact same week, her video was how to fake golden hour. And so we had two videos with almost identical titles, the identical lesson, doing it almost the same way. And I had no idea she was doing it, and she had no idea I was doing it. And the guys at Adorama, who we were submitting our stuff to, were like, how did this happen? Why didn't you give us a heads up? And so that's when, eventually they're like, hey, can you at least submit your ideas so we don't have that happening? Because it was happening all the time. There's not a lot to talk about when it comes to photography. Technical stuff, you got the exposure triangle and angle of view and, a few dozen things. That's it. There's really not much more than that. Lighting, same thing. There's a few different lighting concepts, and once you know it, you know it. The things that are individual and unique is how do you apply that stuff to your craft? How do you cook the egg differently than somebody else? How do you do that stuff? There is a thing that I have observed with younger influencers and artists and people that want to do YouTube channels and things like that. And that is, I don't want to share what I'm doing with anybody because I don't want them to find out how I'm doing what I'm doing and copying me. I hear that a lot
See, that's
from newer,
interesting.
younger people.
And that's interesting that you say that because for a long time it was the thing like, well, back in the 80s, pre-internet, photographers never used to share their secret sauce, and it's because of the internet that we have the community that we have nowadays where, people are, open to sharing. But it seems like this may come around full circle from what you're saying.
Well, what happens is those people find out that that is the exact wrong thing to do because A, you don't get the feedback that you need. You don't know that you're a bad singer. You're not getting, you're in your own echo chamber. And so you go from novice to competent really rapidly. And then you really just don't get any better from there. And so what's happening is the people that don't share, that don't work and don't get feedback, they become the most incredibly average creators on the planet because there's nothing that's sharpening their blade. And so, um, so I would say that the film photographers that I knew back in the day in the 80s and even the guys that I knew that started their careers in the 60s and 70s, they did share. They did work together. Look at Andy Warhol. What did he do? He created the factory.
Mm.
Um, I was able to do some stuff with Greg Gorman, who was the 80s very you don't know him, but you know his work. So he shot Tootsie, the poster for Tootsie, and he shot Andy Warhol, and he shot um, a, like Sophia Loren, and he shot young Leonardo DiCaprio, and like all these Hollywood people. Um, so now he's 70-ish or something like that. I was able to go to his house. Me and Ab Cisse, the guy that I talk to all the time, we went to his house for a weekend and did some stuff with him. And he was an open book. He showed us how to light for black and white photography and how he did it and his approach to all of that stuff. That's how I learned a lot about light was observing Greg Gorman and how he worked. He let us just watch him do photo shoots. And then he would give us feedback. He'd give us a bunch of wine. We were drinking and taking pictures. It was great. Um, but like the guy that I assisted, who was a Life magazine, Time magazine photographer, National Geographic photographer. I mean, that's the elite. He let me see every single part of the process. It was the people that were Olin Mills photographers, the middle of the road photographers. Those are the guys that were like, don't look at my stuff. It's special sauce. That's a huge mistake, you know. Even look at current day. I was watching, I'm a huge Dua Lipa fan, so don't judge me, but she's amazing. Um, so I was watching how Dua Lipa wrote this song for the Barbie movie. I'll send you the link to this video, but it's incredible. So she didn't write it by herself. So she wrote it with another guy who was a producer and a musician. So he was writing the score and she was writing the lyrics. And then they were working together to create something for this movie. And so what they got was they got instructions from the studio, like, you have to make this song, has to be this amount of time, it has to be this so many beats per minute. And so the guy that created the music sent it to the studio and they're like, we love this. And they recorded all the dances and they filmed everything to that track. And the lyrics had not been written yet. And so Dua Lipa then got this backing track and she got the dailies so she could watch what the dancers and all the choreography and everything was doing. And then she had to write the song to that. So she could not add another measure of music. She could not change the timing. She couldn't, like, she was locked in to this very set formula. It had to work because it had already been filmed. And so she wrote this song based on very, very confined requirements. And it's brilliant. So you watch this video and you're like, that is mind blowing that these guys were able to take this track, massage it into something that is totally new, that fit what was already filmed, because they filmed it before the music was written, before the words were written, and that she read the script and was able to tie it into the plot of the movie. It's brilliant. So I need to send you this video because it's a fun process to watch. That video, also Drumeo. Do you know about Drumeo?
Oh yes, of course. Big fan. Big fan.
So let me go off on a tangent just really quickly. Yeah. If you're a photographer and you want to become a better photographer, you should learn other disciplines. You should learn about music. You should learn about literature. You should be writing. You should learn about filmmaking. You should learn about blocking. You should learn about theater. You should learn about writing for theater. You should learn about art history. Like, you should expand what you know of the world so that you have something that can influence your work. So everything that you see, everything that you do, every experience you have influences the way you are as a photographer. And if you have a limited understanding of what art is and you only know it from the perspective of the history of photography or the history of certain types of photography, you are going to miss out. You should be watching Drumeo videos to blow your mind on how different drummers approach active listening.
It's the best.
Learning active listening will help you be a better photographer because then you'll learn how to respond to your clients in a different way. So you can watch a video about how to drum and apply that to how you approach a studio session. Or you can look at how Dua Lipa wrote a song and apply that to something that you're spec'd for a commercial client. You could look at the discipline of numbers. There's a fantastic mathematician. She is a teacher at Oxford, a professor at Oxford, or maybe Cambridge. She's got a show in the UK. I forgot her name. She's really funny. She just won an Emmy Award. She was on Taskmaster, so the Christmas special. I watch all of her stuff. I hate math, or as you guys say, maths. Um, I'm not a math person, but it is so amazing to watch like these different Oxford professors and Cambridge professors and these guys that are explaining things about black holes and dark matter and statistical analysis and all kinds of stuff. And you're like, oh, I could apply that to my photography because now I know that this applies to this. Yeah. And that's another part of collaboration is if you only hang
Yeah.
out with photographers, you're missing out. You should hang
Yeah.
out with all kinds of people.
See, what you're talking about is what I used to call kernel theory, and I used to use my own kernel theory to sort of explain creativity or creative origins to people. Because in music in particular, and again, I'm using music as an example, but this applies to any creative discipline, no matter whether it's writing or photography or filmmaking, whatever it may be. Um, One of the questions I used to get asked a lot, because I used to write a lot of music, whether that was as part of a production, as part of sessions. Because I mean, what would happen, when I turned up for a session, usually there was no guitar part written. It wasn't, you know, in the
Sure.
late '90s, early 2000s, it wasn't a case of like with 90% of all the sessions I did, it wasn't a case of you rock up and they give you a already written finished guitar part and I go here play this. That was
Sure.
very rare that that happened. To be honest with you, I've that only happened to me, on film scores, but it's a different thing. And even there, the composer has to create the music to whatever is happening in that cut. This is a thing. There's certain points where certain things have to happen, so consequently, the tempo might change radically from one, from one point to another or whatever. So again, you're composing your music within these limitations, and that's what composing actually means is you're putting elements together to make something.
Sure.
And so one of the things that I used to get asked all the time is like, okay, well, how do you write a song? Right? How do you do it? Like what do you start with? And the answer is anything. And it's different every time. Because
Right.
the reality is the initial kernel, the initial thing that kicks off the process. One time it could be a chord that you play on the guitar, and it might be a mistake, a fluke, you might play a chord and your finger's in the wrong place and you go, oh, wait a minute, that's a cool sound, you know,
Right.
or it might be something you hear. I remember I wrote an instrumental acoustic guitar piece once, and I remember I was sitting on the couch. My daughter had literally just learned how to walk a little bit. And I remember I was sitting on the couch. We had a wooden floor in the living room, and this is the first time I saw her basically pull herself up on the door frame and then walk across the entire length of the living room, right? And of course, she was walking, but of course, she wasn't very stable. And so the rhythm that her feet made on the floorboards ended up being the essential rhythm of the tune that I was writing at that point.
Oh, that's cool.
And it was just that element that kicked something off. I heard the rhythm, I thought, "Oh, wait a minute, that's cool." So in this case, that was the kernel for that particular tune,
Sure.
the point of origin. It could be like, I don't know, it could be anything. It could be a rhythm, it could be a harmony, a chord, it could be a
Anything.
line, it could be a lyric. It could
Could
be
be a
anything.
mistake that you make. There's a
Yeah.
principle in, the book I told you about, Jumpstart Your Brain, that we applied in any creative, team that I've worked on, and it's the principle of the ugly baby. And so what happens is when you work in a group of people or even by yourself, you'll get ideas, and, uh, almost all of them are ugly babies. They're not very good ideas to start with. The kernel is not popped yet, it's not grown yet, it's not producing anything yet. And if you're working in a group, one of the worst things that you can do is to tell somebody their baby is ugly. So instead, what you do is usually you do this in an iterative way. So let's say you and I are working on an idea and you throw something out, and I'm like, oh, that's just not a very good idea. I don't say that because you know it's not a very good idea. We all know it's an ugly baby. But what we do instead is like improv, it's yes and. It's like you throw out an idea. Hey, what if we do a YouTube video series about how to, use a light stand? I'm like, that's not a very good idea. So I don't say that. But what I would say is, yeah, but what if we expand on that? Not just light stands. What if we then also add like maybe some things that you would do in a studio? And you're like, oh, wait, you know what? We could do stuff like how we do, how would you work as a beginning photographer, how to build out a studio? Like, oh, yeah, not only that, why don't we do this? Why don't we create a PDF guide where it's a guide to how you can build out your studio over a 12-month period? And let's bring in so and so that they can help us budget out this thing, and we can even do a business class. And that guy's like, oh yeah, but this, and then all of a sudden that ugly baby of let's make a video about a light stand becomes a course on creating your own home studio or whatever. And that is something that you've got to be able to do, is to look at something that's not a great idea but see the potential in it and grow it. And then conversely, you also have to be able to see an idea that's just not getting there and kill it. You know, you've
Yeah.
you've gotta be able to say, "Okay, like, this is not a good idea. We've worked on it, we've workshopped it, we've collaborated, we've looked at it from different perspectives. Nobody wants to see a series of videos about the differences between light stands that have wheels and light stands that don't. It's just this is not a good idea." And then you have to be able to, as a community, as a collaborative team, be able to go, "Okay," and then just move on. You
Often
know,
often it's a matter
you
of
have
yet,
to grow.
though. It might not be a good idea yet.
Right.
There's been many occasions where, you know, I wasn't in a position where it all of a sudden occurred to me that I had an idea 10 years ago that now all of a sudden I've subconsciously come up with
And
with a
just
different
dunk.
angle and go, "Oh, now I know. I've just realized how I can make that work."
Sure.
And so you can, if you have these sort of things on the back burner, you can kind of pull these out again and go, "Well, this wasn't a good idea at the time, but it just,
But it
it
is
just
now.
was." Yeah, but it is now.
Yeah. I have a Evernote subscription. I don't know if you are
Yeah,
familiar with
I
Evernote.
know it. Yeah.
It's it only works if you use it, but it's basically a note-taking application that everything you put in is, categorized and searchable, even handwritten stuff, photos, all that kind of stuff. And so I do exactly what you just described. Anytime I have an idea for a video, I throw it into this, my Evernote, notebooks. I've got a notebook for ideas. Like, I think this is an idea, or this is a inspirational thing, or I saw this video, whatever. I just have thousands and thousands of notes of ideas. And when I'm looking at planning out, okay, what am I gonna do this quarter? What content? I'll just go through that and I'll have that experience. I'm like, that's something to that. No, that's still bad. That's still bad. What was I thinking there? I'll go through my own ugly baby list. And sometimes you find gold. The other way you find gold is by mistakes. You can make mistakes. And I'll give you an example. Years ago, I used to do camps and conferences for high school kids and college students. And one of the things we did is we made comedy sketches like you would see on SNL, like these little like funny commercials or like these videos that we would play on these just big old jumbotrons. And we were always looking for ideas for that. And this is when back in my college days. And so one of my friends who was also part of this group where we were creating stuff. He was he had to do a video presentation for some class about a social issue, and his issue was cancer and the how cancer is not a good thing. And this is when I was extremely skinny. I used to weigh about 135 pounds. I looked so sick. And so I I was over at his house. He's like, dude, you look so bad. Can I use you and make this film about cancer? I'm like, okay. And so the video, and this is back in VHS days where you had to like the precision of cutting, like when you made the cut, that was it. Like it was no nonlinear stuff. Like you'd have to press play and hit record, and like it was like not very
I remember it
high end.
well. That's how I started a video.
Yeah, yeah, me too. Before we had in and out points, and it was just like press, okay, and you'd have like a.
Yeah.
So what happened is the concept for this video was me looking not so good, and I'm just reciting these statistics of, this amount of people get this type of cancer, and this kind of people get this type of cancer, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens. And at the end of the video, there's this pause, and I said something like, "Get real, cancer kills," and it's supposed to be this big dramatic, you know, moment in the video. And so my friend goes to cut this video, and he cuts it. And like a couple of weeks later, I'm like, dude, did you show the video? And he's like, oh, disaster. And I'm like, what happened? So when he showed the video, because the precision of the edit wasn't right, it's all these images of horrible things, da 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 da. And then there's like a cancer kills. And that's how it just like cuts to me going, cancer kills. And so when he showed it in class, everybody laughed because the timing was so horrible. And we were like, well, that's sort of obvious. And we're like, that could be a great series. And so out of that was born this video series that we created called Obvious Things. And it was like really funny, like SNL stuff. And it'd be like people trying to cook hot dogs, like, my hand, and fire burns. Or, it'd be like we had a stuffed animal looking at from the stuffed dog's perspective, a freeway, and then it cuts to this girl going, Fluffy, where are you, Fluffy? Not all dogs come home. And it would be like just these horrible things cut like intentionally poorly, but it was all based on this mistake that happened in this editing bay. Uh, you know, Stuff like you never know when there's gonna be something that's gold that happens, which can also be frustrating that you're like, "I need something that's brilliant," and it doesn't come, and you
Yeah.
make a mistake, and you're like, "Oh, that's brilliant."
Yeah, that's it. And the thing about, about something being brilliant, again, we come back to note taking, for example, is, something cannot be brilliant now, but there might be a point in time where it just fits like a piece of a puzzle. I'll tell
Sure.
you a story. I used to work with uh, this producer and songwriter called Tremaine. And he used to work for Virgin Records and Chrysalis, and a variety of other major labels. Um, and I a lot of the time, I was involved in the pre-production process. So this basically, let's say there was an artist, um, it's back in the day when A&R was actually still a thing, where basically you had um, staff, almost like staff or contracted songwriters on a development deal, and then there were artists, and you would be put together, and you'd have to create some material for this particular artist, and this would happen across the board, and then eventually the A&R department would pick the right songs for this artist. But so a lot of the time we'd be in a situation where, okay, we've got this artist who could come up with some stuff, um, to pitch it to the label. Okay, so and we would literally meet, you know, and often I would start getting involved in the process when there was really no material, there was no music. And there was an artist, I'd rock up, and all of a sudden, it was like, okay, well, we'll just draw some ideas. And I was just really good at just coming up with some musical ideas, right? And so we'll bounce some stuff, and let's say I just start, I start throwing some chords out, I start with a groove on a guitar or something. And
Sure.
Tremaine had this ability to really, at lightning speed, to come up with vocal lines and write really phenomenal lyrics. And, often it would be a thing that he would come up with, or it would be, the artist we would be working with, he or she would start singing some lines, but within no time at all, he would come up with these incredible lyrics. And I remember I used to say to him, like, how do you do that? Because I'm really good at coming up with musical ideas. I'm not very good at writing lyrics. And my excuse has always been, well, I'm a non-native English speaker, so don't ask me. you know,
So, yeah, this is
it's
not
like,
me.
like I can't. I'm really rubbish at writing deep lyrics because. And again, I used to say, I talk a lot, but I don't have a lot to say. You know, it's just not my talent. And so I've always been fascinated by Jermaine's ability to just come up with something like really great lyrics so quickly. And I remember we're having this conversation. I asked him, and he said, like, "Do you know what I do? Is I have a little voice recorder and a notebook, and whenever I see something, this might be a slogan on a billboard. I might drive past something, I see something, somebody says something, I hear something on a TV show or whatever, you know, and something that a phrase that just captures me somehow, I'll write it down. Or I come up with an idea whilst I'm driving, I just quickly record it on my voice recorder. And so he said, like, I've accumulated this vast, vast, vast arsenal of little weapons, basically.
Sure.
And when we sit in the studio and he goes, like, you come up with a groove or some chords, and I hear melody, I just think about what that reminds me of. And there's gonna be something in this vast array of little ideas that I've collected over time that will just fit. And that's like that immediately then sparks off all the rest. And this might be, you just need one line of a song or a phrase, and you can immediately that puts you in a particular in a situation, or
Mhm.
you know, it just triggers all the rest of it. And
That's
e-
the importance of having lots of stimuli, lots and lots of
exactly.
stimuli to go
Absolutely.
and to tie back, watch Dremio, watch these mathematical things, watch, like, learn about art, watch, read, and think about, like, when were you the funniest? When did you have the most inside jokes? It was when you were a kid and when you were in college and in high school because you were with 100 other people your age interacting all the time, all day. You had inside jokes. You had things like your parents didn't understand what you were talking about. Other people like, "What are you saying?" And it was like, "Oh, we're all in on this joke because we all shared this thing." And it was just like you couldn't contain the stuff that was coming out. This new, like it was like a volcano of ideas and new content. And then that sort of goes away because, as you grow older now, it's just you and 2 or 3 other people every day, and you don't have this massive stimuli of stuff coming in, except for, whatever the algorithm is shoving down your throat, which is not a good way to get stimuli. So I do not count Instagram and, all that stuff to be the best. That's not the best creative diet. In fact, I'd say it's almost the opposite of that. Um, Another great example of music writing, Sarah Bareilles. I don't know if you're a Sarah Bareilles fan, but you should be. She's amazing. Um, on her first album, so her first album was Little Voice, and it's the first album. It's, upbeat, whatever. And the producer said, "You have to write a love song. You have to write a love song for this album." And so she wrote the song that became "I'm Not Gonna Write You a Love Song." And so the whole song is, "I'm not writing you a love song." And it's a brilliant song about, like, this relationship and stuff, but the reason that she wrote it is because they told her she had to, and she's like, "I'm not writing you a love song." And it's this great story of how she had to do it because it was part of her contract, but she did it in a way that she didn't do it. If that makes sense. Um, yeah, if you don't know Sarah Bareilles and her writing and her music, man, do yourself a favor and start at Little Voice and sort of work your way through her anthology, and you'll see an artist that matures to a level that is mind-blowingly good. And she's won a Tony for she wrote, Waitress on Broadway. I think she's done 2 Broadway shows, And then she's got a show on Apple TV called Little Voice, which is loosely based on her life as a young artist. She doesn't act in it. Somebody else plays this fictional version of her. All of it, I think, is fantastic. But she's one of my favorite artists because she pulls back the curtains and allows you to see how she created the stuff that she created. And all these sort of pop songs that on the surface are like, okay, they're fun, they're cool, you can dance to it. They all have this layer of depth to them that means something so much more. Um, Even in the Apple TV show Little Voice, I don't want to spoil it for you, but there's this dynamic between this girl and her brother. And so the show is a musical. Um, there is a song called King of the Lost Boys. And so I listened to the score and the soundtrack to this show before I saw the show. And so I listened to this song over and over because I'm like, this is an amazing song. I just don't know what it means. And then you see the show and you're like, oh my gosh, this means this. But in the show, they only play like 10 seconds of the song. There wasn't enough time for the whole song. Um, but I love it because the music that she wrote that was never in the actual show that she wrote it for has this depth that is so amazing. And you listen to those lyrics. I'm like, I challenge you not to cry when you listen to this song once you know the story that it was written about. I just love that kind of creativity. It's like I'm created this whole universe that doesn't even get seen in the universe it was created for. I created a whole world for a universe and it doesn't even get to show up. But yeah, artists like that, I think that counts as collaboration. Just dig in, see how people are writing, see how people are creating, see why they're creating, get the stories. It's fantastic. Have you read Stephen King on writing?
No, I haven't read it actually. That's a good point.
You should read it. Stephen King has a book about how he's created. How many books has he written? Hundreds. So he wrote a book on like how he writes, and it's not a very big book. It is phenomenal to read this and be like, oh, he does basically these three fundamental things, and out of that, he has written. He's probably, arguably, one of the most successful writers in history.
Yeah. Now, finally, let's say we convinced somebody about, how to be creative, and the importance of collaboration, but what do you actually do? How do you collaborate with other people? Where do you go? Who do you talk to? How do you get involved? What are some of the best ways that people can start on that collaborative journey?
You'll evolve in your collaborations. And so if you're early days in your career as a photographer or creative, I always encourage people to find a way to collaborate face to face, not virtually. It's a radically different experience, which means find a photo club, join, like in the United States, you have the Professional Photographers of America. You can join that organization. They have local chapters, local meetups. There's probably a photo walk or a photo club in every single major and medium-sized city in the world. I mean, they're everywhere. So go on social media, find out. I know, like in Medellin, there's a group that meets every Saturday to do street photography. There's an art school, and they meet twice a week for people to come in, and they have food, and they talk about photography, and they team up to do stuff. There's going to be an organization like that in your community. So ppa.com is a great place to start. And then look for things. If you're into portrait photography, one of the best things to do is ask, go on Purple Port if you're in London. I don't know if that's still a thing.
Yeah, big
A
time.
lot of Model Mayhem in the United States. When you book your first model, who are they shooting with? What photographers are they working with? Look up that photographer, get their information, send them an email. Be like, hey, you want to go have coffee? Can I pick your brain? Can I assist you? Find. I am consistently looking at portfolios online, and if I see somebody that inspires me, like Emily Teague, I think her work is amazing. She used to work for Ellen Crown. She's a fashion photographer in New York City. I'm like, Emily, can I just have a Zoom call with you? Can I, pick your brain about how you do stuff? And she is just the most giving person ever. And I've done that with, I don't know, dozens and dozens and dozens of photographers where I'm like, hey, can I just ask you, what's your workflow? What's your process? How do you come up with these ideas? How are you doing stuff? Like Martin in London, same thing. We went out and, I don't live in London, but we were able to hang out for a weekend and he showed me all kinds of really cool stuff. And I learned how he does his post production. So if you can, find a local chapter, a local photography group, get plugged in, meet your tribe, and, get plugged in. If you don't have a photo club, at the very least, find other artists that are doing what you want to do, find their email, find their phone number, try to call them or send them a note. Almost all of them are going to say, sure, I'd love to. You're going to buy me a coffee? You're going to buy me a beer? Yeah, let's hang out. People love to talk about themselves. So, you know, if I called you and like, Kirsten, your stuff is amazing. I've never seen portraits like this. Can I pick your brain? You'd be like, yeah, let's go.
Yeah.
That's pretty darn common. And if you're like, hey, I'll carry your light stands, I'll do whatever. Can I come and assist? Depending on the type of photo shoot, but a lot of times photographers will invite you in. The other thing, find a local community college, find a college, audit classes. You're going to meet instructors, you're going to meet other students. Even if you're not doing it for credit, you're just doing it for the experience. Go to an institution of higher learning and enroll, or find an art school. Even if you're not going to be a painter or a sculptor or, a different discipline, enroll in a writing class, enroll in a painting class, go do those things. You're going to meet other creatives and they're going to know other creatives. And then lastly, go to the big shows. So Imaging USA, WPPI, what's the one in UK, the photo show? Is that what it's called?
Photography show, yeah.
The photography show. I didn't go to Build this year. So B&H has a big show called Build. And I'm regretting it because a bunch of friends of mine did. They're like, there's 25,000 people there. I'm like, what? I thought it was going to be like a few hundred people. I didn't know it was going to be
That
this
and that is
massive thing.
I did the same thing. I didn't realize how big it's gonna be, and just like you, I had a lot of people who were like, "Hey, we're built, it's awesome." I'm like, "Oh, how did I miss out on
Yeah.
that?"
I thought it was going to be an in-store event at B&H. I didn't realize it was going to be 25,000 people at the Javits Center. Like, man, I missed out. I really missed out on that. I wish I would have gone. But there are things like that all the time. So the way to find out about those things is, as annoying as it might be, get on the mailing lists of PPA, Imaging USA, the photography show, because they partner with tons of brands. And then you find out stuff like, oh, DxO is having a festival in Paris this week because that's where they're based. Or, so-and-so is doing this in Florida. Or like Evoto does a bunch of events. They do an event almost every week. The Adobe does events almost every day. Adobe's doing stuff, Adobe Live and all the Behance stuff. There are so many ways. There are more ways to meet other creatives than there are online dating apps. So there's no excuse that you can't meet other photographers and creatives in your area, meet them face to face and do some collaboration.
Or join the Camera Shake podcast Facebook group. Do that, or sign up to our mailing list because that's where all the cool people hang out. Clearly,
All the cool people. And then eventually the Camera Shake podcast Facebook group will move to some social media platform that isn't so divisive. And then more people will sign up. I'm like, you lost me at Facebook, dude. I'm like,
uh,
just for
well,
that reason, like I
yeah,
couldn't do it.
it's just because it's a group type of a thing. But we're I say we, I keep saying we, so really just me. Anyway, me and the podcast. So the Camera
Well,
Shake podcast.
there's a new thing. I don't know if YouTube has released it to the world yet, but YouTube creators at like at the level I'm at, we get sneak peeks at stuff that's coming. Sometimes they make it to market and sometimes they don't. And so last month they sent out a thing. So we've always had the ability to make posts on YouTube, but now they have YouTube communities and it's more of a Discord type chat for your YouTube channel. And so, check out your YouTube studio. You might already have this, but it's basically what you have on Facebook without the Facebook. So it's on it's on YouTube where it's a real discussion forum where people can post their photos, get feedback, you can do polls, you can like do all the stuff that you want to do in a community, but it's on your own YouTube channel. So, the reason I don't know that if that's out to the world yet, I don't think it is for me, that's game changing because Facebook now in the United States has become so divisive that I I intentionally don't go there, um, because it's like going to a political rally. It can be really, really, really in a heartbeat. A picture can become a political discussion. You're like, wait, well, hold on, slow down. Um, where you don't necessarily see that on other platforms, but other platforms don't have the same sense of community that Facebook had. It's really frustrating. So hopefully, this new thing on YouTube actually makes it to market, and everybody has access to it.
You can also find us on Blue Sky, I should say.
There you go.
The variety
Dun,
of other
dun, dun,
platforms.
dun. You're like, hey, Mark, you're picking on me.
Yay.
You're
Well,
mean.
it's like the thing about this is that, these things keep changing all the time. I mean, a platform that's like
Always.
super hip and in now is going to be completely out of the picture,
Well, the
next summer.
crazy thing, I mean, they are maturing. So early days of social media, you would have a platform that would last 6 months and then evaporate. And then it would make it a few years and then it evaporate. And now, Facebook, for all of its faults, has endured. YouTube has endured. Twitter arguably has sort of endured. Threads is struggling. Blue Sky, we'll see what happens there. Behance, I don't think anybody knows what that is. That's Adobe's version of social media.
Sometimes they come back though, the classic. Because I was wondering the other day, should I set up a new MySpace account?
Maybe so. Maybe so.
Let's go retro. Let's go all the way.
It's like vinyl.
Yes.
MySpace will be the vinyl of 2030.
It would surprise me, man. It would surprise me if things like that came back. It's like, "Ooh, MySpace, that was cool."
I
It's
want
fun.
to remember the sparkly cursor when you move your cursor and it was like all sparkly
Oh, yeah.
and you could like, that was cool. And the fights about the top 12, who was in the top 12? Like, yeah, man, tell me you're old without telling me you're old.
Well, on that
Yeah,
note, Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show, as always.
it's been fun.
Fantastic, man.
Let's do this again, but let's do it live
Ooh,
where people can watch and ask
very good.
questions. Maybe we can do see, I'm just throwing out an ugly baby. Maybe we can do a collaborative live stream with the ATEMs. You've got an ATEM mini, right?
Yes.
I think so. We could simulcast. So you could be on your YouTube channel. I could be on my YouTube channel. We could
Mm.
take comments live from both
Ooh,
channels
cool.
and we could just record it and invite the world to join in. And then maybe we could even have special guests joining in. We could have like Gavin Hoey popping in or Daniel Norton popping in or Vanessa
Yeah.
Joy popping in or whatever. And we could do a marathon. And then maybe we could connect it to some things that we really are passionate about, like working to help raise awareness and money for Street Child or the International Rescue Committee, or like we could do some stuff. This is
Yeah.
how collaboration works.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm totally up for that. 100%, man. Okay, folks, that is it for today. What a fantastic conversation with Mark. As per usual, so many insights into how creative collaboration and community can fuel your growth and creativity as a photographer in 2025 or actually anytime. As always, before we go, let me just recommend another episode I think you'll enjoy. Check out episode 220, where Mark shared essential lighting tips. It's a must listen if you haven't caught it yet. If you enjoy our content, consider supporting us on buymeacoffee.com/camerashake to help us keep creating and bringing you more exciting episodes. It really does mean the world to us. And for those of you listening to the audio version of this podcast, did you know that there's a full video version over on YouTube with plenty of examples of our guest photography in full Technicolor? Well, you should, because I mention it all the time. Just head over to YouTube, search for Camera Tech Podcast, and you'll find all past episodes there. And if you're already on YouTube, well, make sure to drop us a comment, hit that like button, ring the bell, and share with your friends, because your engagement helps us reach photographers all over the world. So the only thing else left to say is thank you for listening and watching. And remember, a new episode drops every Thursday. So make sure you mark that in your calendars, diaries, whatever your kids use these days. Until next time, keep shaking things up in the world of photography. See you next Thursday.